Right. Welcome back, folks. We're going to talk about brain health today and things that we can do to help to support our brain health. And when I say brain, I'm going to include our nervous system. And what are some maybe signs and symptoms and even diagnosis of when our brain is not functioning as well as we'd like to, our nervous system is not functioning as well as we'd like to. So first off, when we're talking about our brain and the nervous system, okay, so our nervous system includes our brain and all of the nerves that go down our entire spinal cord. And the spinal cord, right, ends I think about S1, S2, but then we have all these spinal nerves that go out to our fingers, to our toes. So when we have sensations, when you feel vibration, you feel pain, all of that is sending signals to the spinal cord, to our brain. Okay. And our brain is split up into the perception, right, like how we sense things, and then into our muscle control part of our brain. So that's a lot of that information is either how we sense things, like sense pain, sense temperature, sense vibration, and then the second part is how we send the signals to actually like move your hand off the stove or move your muscles, right, move your body to make things happen. So when there's dysfunction in the brain and the signaling parts or in the neurons that go to our fingers and toes, we can see things like dementia, memory changes, Parkinson's, neuropathies, Lou Gehrig's, Alzheimer's, seizures. We can see all of those as a dysfunction, but even maybe lesser on that spectrum of dysfunction in the nervous system, things like ADD and ADHD that we may experience on a regular basis. If people have ever had surgery or injury to your nerves, that can create that intense pain. If you've ever had something dislocated or like sciatic nerve, right, pain, where there's a pain that's a burning or stabbing or electrocute, like feels like electricity, oftentimes that's a dysfunction in the nervous system somewhere. It's just a matter if it's local or if it's systemic, right? So things like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia are often more systemic versus like an injury to the nerve, or like a neuropathy. So but we look at it the same way because we look at our brain health and our nervous system. So our brain is 70% fat. Okay. So the primary preferred fuel is fats, right? So oftentimes you'll see when we're trying to support the nervous system, a high healthy fat diet. Oftentimes the keto diet will come up, especially around Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia care. The preferred diet is a keto diet because we're trying to support our brain health. Oftentimes, even when folks start a keto diet that are high in healthy fats, they may notice less ADD, ADHD symptoms, better cognition and memory, even in healthy adults. And so it's because as our brain changes and regenerates, we need those fats, those building blocks, right? So I'm gonna date myself, but when we were young, right, you'd see the commercials on TV and they'd put a frying pans in or eggs in the frying pan and they'd say, this is your brain on drugs. And they taught us that when we did drugs and we killed our brain cells, that was it. We have no more brain cells. Like, you're done.
Yes.
Which now we know that that's not true. Our brain can regenerate just like other parts of our body, right? Our nervous system can regenerate, but it often regenerates a little bit slower than other tissues. Okay. And that can be for a couple of different reasons. But as our nerves, regenerate and change, we have what we call neuroplasticity. So especially with memory issues, with dementia and Alzheimer's, the more that we engage our brain in new activities, we're encouraging that neuroplasticity. So we're encouraging new highways or roads to be built in our brain, right? So you have more neural signaling. Okay. Now, the reason why our brain and our nervous system can be a little bit slower at regenerating is because we have this blood-brain barrier. Okay. So conventional medicine would like to think that our blood-brain barrier is an enclosed, okay, and we were taught in med school that it's enclosed system and it's sterile to a certain extent. Okay. So, like when you have, meningitis, or you have to get a lumbar puncture, right? Or if you're pregnant, you're getting epidural, there's a very specific process because we can't contaminate, that spinal cord fluid in the blood-brain barrier. Okay. So the idea is the nutrients that get in that blood-brain barrier circulate within itself. So it's somewhat of a closed system, but things can cross that blood-brain barrier. They have to be a certain size and a certain like solubility. So since our brain is fat, things that are fat soluble will often cross that blood-brain barrier a little bit easier. But inflammation, our inflammatory cells can also cross that blood-brain barrier. So the chronic nervous system difficulties, like dementia, Alzheimer's, even neuropathies, those are often caused because of an inflammation that has crossed the blood-brain barrier and now is creating neural inflammation in the brain. So addressing that neural inflammation in the brain has to start in the body where the immune system is, which is often in the gut. But we can promote better brain health by addressing inflammation with our diet, by reducing a lot of processed foods and sugars is usually the #1 cause of inflammation. Alzheimer's has been dubbed type 3 diabetes because we can see that direct relationship between the higher blood sugars, the more insulin resistant, the more changes in the brain that creates that dementia and Alzheimer's. So that inflammation from our diet and our lifestyle crosses that blood-brain barrier, which makes it harder for the brain to repair and regenerate. Does that make sense? So if we're trying to stimulate that regeneration, healthy fats, things like MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, are one of the #1 ingredients I like to share with folks. Because if you think of those neural pathways, a lot like our electric cords, right? Like our electric cords that we plug in, there's electricity that goes through them. Well, what keeps us from getting shocked is that it's coated in this like rubber plastic coating. In our nervous system, that rubber plastic coating is called our myelin sheath. And that myelin sheath, main ingredients is medium chain triglycerides. And so
coconut oil, like is coconut oil medium chain triglycerides?
Coconut oil has medium chain triglycerides in it.
Okay.
Right. So oftentimes, like, because the MCTs you'll find are always a liquid that's hardly ever solid, right? Versus coconut oil at 76 degrees or 87, it'll go solid. Right. So they actually extract the medium chain triglycerides from the coconut oil.
Okay.
But so that's one big component, making sure we're increasing those medium chain triglycerides, either with coconut oil, the whole food form, coconut milk, right? Coconuts, or as a filtered form is MCT. Yeah. The other omega-3s, right, that we've often hear about, fish oils, flaxseed oil, things like borage oil or evening primrose oil, all of those omega-3s will have an affinity for the brain. Okay. So they will also help support a healthy nervous system. Now, there's omega-3s, omega-6s, and omega-9s. Okay. Omega-9, so if you have the right ratio of omega-3, 6, and 9, usually you're doing really well. Okay. Omega-9, if it's out of ratio, if you have a significantly more amount of omega-9s than you do omega-3s, you're going to have inflammation. Omega-9 is more inflammatory, which is what we find in fried foods, processed foods. We often find omega-9s. So I don't usually recommend that people supplement with omega-9, because if you eat food in the US, it's going to have omega-9s in it. Yeah. So we want to balance that out. That's why we always recommend omega-3s, because we're trying to increase your omega-3s to match the 9 that you're getting in your diet already. Right. Yeah. So if you have that imbalance where you have a lot more omega-9s, it's fat soluble, it has an affinity for your brain, but it will create that neural inflammation. So it can may not look like dementia right away, right? But even just changes in our memory, things like, oh, where did I put my keys? Or, oh, I know that person, but I can't think of her name off the top of my head. And of course, the more episodes of that can be an indicator, right, of the neural inflammation that's in our brain.
So I love, because you know my face so well. I was like, oh, she's got a question. So stress creates a lot of inflammation in our body. Yes. And inflammation in our brain. So I'm visual. So I always, people that stay in chronic stress, it's kind of like poison to the brain, because you're really working against yourself. If you're doing, like, if you're eating all these omega-3s, you're getting your MCT oil, right? But if you're saying stress all the time, like,
yeah,
right?
Yes. So if you're stressed all the time, you're creating that imbalance in that chemical reaction, right? Mm-hmm. So that chemical reaction is what stimulates the electrical impulses to go through the nervous system, go through the brain, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think of those electrical signals, think of them like a roller coaster ride, right? Your stress is the roller coaster operator that's like letting that car go, right? And slowing it down and then starting another one. So if it's constantly on, you're constantly going to have, that chemical reaction of stress occurring, that high cortisol, that changes in the norepinephrine and epinephrine. Yes. That can also create, how do I say this? It changes the energy in your brain. So, because we talk about how stress plays into that primal brain, right, versus the cortex, the prefrontal cortex. That stress, that fear, that anxiety, that triggers that amygdala and that primal brain. So the more stress that we experience, or the over time, creates changes in that amygdala, which actually, again, it decreases the signals that get to the prefrontal cortex, right? So it's changing the energy or the direction of those neurons that get sent out.
I've heard that it even changes the size of the prefrontal cortex. Like, it causes it to shrink.
Yes. So I'm not sure this is where we wanted to go, but there,
we can switch back, but yeah.
No, that's okay. So, and I don't know if I've talked about this on here, but there were experiments on baby monkeys that were looking at this exact thing on the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And they wanted to see how chronic stress affects the structure of the brain. Okay. So they had two different groups of monkeys, and in one group they took the monkeys when they were babies and they removed them from their mom. They took them out of their mom and put them in different areas, and those baby monkeys, they gave them like a teddy bear, like a stuffed monkey, right, and a bottle feeder. And then they took pictures of their brain. They did functional MRIs. And then they had another group of monkeys, baby monkeys, and they left them with their moms. And again, they took pictures of functional MRIs. They took pictures of their brain. They drew cortisol levels on them, and they waited 6 weeks. Okay. At 6 weeks, they did the same tests. They did the MRIs. They took pictures of their brain. They did their cortisol testing. And then they continued the same experiment. I think it was at 12 weeks. It was either 12 weeks or 6 months, so don't quote me on that. I can find the reference for you guys. But they took pictures of the brain. They did their cortisol readings, and what they saw was they compared the two different groups. The monkeys that were removed from their moms, they started at 6 weeks. They did notice a lot of changes, in their brain patterns and their cortisol reactions. At 6 months, when they compared to the other group of monkeys that had their mom the whole time in that 6 months, they noticed a change in the size of their amygdala. That fear center, that survival primal brain, had gotten larger, and their prefrontal cortex had not developed to the same stage as their counterparts who had their mom for the whole 6 months.
Yeah.
They went ahead and continued the research for another 6 months, but at that 6-month mark, what they did is they then reunited the moms with the babies, in that first group. And then in that another 6 months, they retested, they took pictures of the brain, and what they wanted to see was how resilient our brain is. Okay. When they at the end of a year, they compared the babies had been separated and reunited versus the babies had had their moms the whole 12 months. And what they saw was that from that 6-month period to the year, the babies that had been removed and reunited, their prefrontal cortex did begin to grow, and their amygdala began to shrink. And but they were not comparable to their counterparts who'd had their baby had their moms access to their moms the entire 12 months. The original purpose of the experiment was to look at PTSD, how it changes our brain, right? And they did on monkeys because they they were looking at developing programs for veterans who were coming back over being deployed. And so that was the original purpose of the research. But what they found overall was that our brain is resilient, right? That our brain can change when our environment changes, or when significant pieces of it change. But in that first 6 months, comparing those babies that had been removed from their mom versus their counterparts, there were significant difference in how their brain developed. So the idea is the more chronic stress we experience, our brain, we've talked about how efficient our brain wants to be. It will allocate all that energy to that primal brain, because that's what's keeping you alive, and will change the structure and the blood flow to the prefrontal cortex until we choose to prioritize that part of our brain.
Yeah, which I think is part of brain health, but we can get you back on track with the other aspects of it.
It's exactly brain health, though. I mean, we all experience chronic stress to a certain extent. Even when we're looking at dementia and Alzheimer's, one of the a piece of the evaluation, right, to the root cause is how much chronic stress have you experienced, right? Like what has your life been like? Did you have a really high, intense, stressful job? All of those things that is a factor as to what our brain health, where our brain health is, and what we can do to help support it. Yeah. Okay, great question. Let's see. I wanted to throw out another tidbit in addition to doing healthy fats, like so the omega-3s in fish oil, flaxseed oil, things like walnuts, avocados, a lot of most seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, have a decent amount of omega-3 in them. So increasing those in your diet, right, is going to be really beneficial. Another piece, especially if people have dysfunction in their nervous system, like nerve damage, like they're experiencing symptoms of some sort, right? Even sciatic pain, memory lapses, brain fog. There's a component called alpha lipoic acid that can be very beneficial because it's also one of the ingredients in those myelin sheaths. So as we're trying to, stimulate regeneration and regrowth in the brain and in those neural pathways, it can be a very good supporter to promote, better brain health. I think that what we were just talking about with how our brain can change, right? Our brain is very resilient. But part of our brain health is not just the physical component, right? But those thoughts that are creating those chemical reactions, because they have so much power, if you will, in the physiology of our brain and how the blood flow and the neural pathways to our brain. I don't think we would do it justice if we talked to brain health and we didn't talk about our thought patterns and how that creates that change in those chemical changes. Because our brain is very complex, and to be honest, even within like the neurobiology or like the neuropsych fields in science, they're getting closer to understanding the brain, but our brain has a lot of automated pieces to it, and part of that is because it makes it so efficient, right? But it's so complex that there's still a lot of things I think about the brain that science hasn't quite got a handle on yet. But I think that even though that being said, having optimal brain health in our thought process, in our physical and our mind and body, will help us kind of harness that energy, I guess, if you will, to promote even better wellness, right? Like peaceful practices in our life and better, overall body wellness and health.
So for people, let's say you have like early stages of dementia, and you're telling me the brain is has neuroplasticity, right? If you were to get serious, could you reverse that? Or is it you can minimize the progression of it, but this is years of damage that
no, you can slow the process down. Okay. If you feel like you're getting early signs of dementia, if you have a family history of dementia, you can significantly slow that progress down. There's new research out, like I was just reading this morning, of studies where they're actually able to reverse dementia. a lot of the conventional medications that are out there available, they only slow the progression, right? None of them reverse the damage that can be done from dementia and Alzheimer's. But when we're trying to slow things, we can slow things down naturally as well. When we slow things down, it's partly is removing what got us here, right? So it's removing that inflammation. It's beginning to address our thought patterns. It's trying to clean up that physical component of our brain health. Anybody can stimulate neuroplasticity. Even at the beginning stages of dementia, you can stimulate neuroplasticity, and that's with doing things that are new, right? So puzzles, games, hobbies, things that you're engaged in. So not things like watching TV or like, I don't know, social media, but things like puzzles or games or that you're engaged in will help. That's new, something that's new, not something that you could like do in your sleep.
Right. It's like accessing that prefrontal cortex. It's learning something new. It's problem solving.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of research will show that when you have new social interactions, you're engaging different parts of your brain, right? Like even to meet new people or to do another activity with people you don't know, because it's not familiar, then you're engaging different areas and encouraging that neuroplasticity. Yeah. So so I encourage people, like, get out of the house, do something different. And it may not be something people maybe always be comfortable with, but I encourage them, like, hey, go to an activity, go to a class or a museum exhibit, or like a get together or a fair or a festival or something. I like to encourage people to take new classes, right? Like if it's an art class, like a painting class or something, or like we're gonna make birdhouses, or hey, they've got classes at the library that I'm gonna take Tai Chi, or anyhow, that's something that's different and kind of outside of your comfort zone. For anybody, all walks of life, may not be the easiest for us, but it's the easiest for our brain to start creating new pathways, because you're engaging so many different areas at the same time. What happens is oftentimes we because our brain is so efficient, right, we get in this automated mode, right? So for example, for folks who you drive to the grocery store, you drive to work, you have a regular route, and you're not engaged when you're driving. You get in the car and you get there and you're like, I'm here. I didn't really like see the colors of the cars around me. I noticed, I hope and pray that I didn't run a stoplight or a stop sign. Right? So because our brain is so efficient, we hold on to those things, right? So that's when you're encouraging neuroplasticity. It's like, oh, I got to go a different route, or I need to, like, let's meet somewhere else. It's like you've got to engage those different parts of your brain to maintain your brain health. At any age.
That makes sense. And I can see as we get older, because our body only can take so much abuse, then you start feeling you deal with the consequences of years of not great choices. Right. So then the body gets tired. You feel tired all the time. You feel achy. Things hurt. So then it's easier to sit and watch TV, and it's easier to just kind of do the same thing over and over, because that's so much of the comfort zone. I can see how that is just like a death trap.
Exactly. Sometimes when people if they start to recognize, hey, it's harder for me to engage in conversations with people, like at church or at the grocery store or whatever. So then they start pulling back, right? They start pulling back because they don't want people to recognize that maybe they're not thinking as clearly.
Right.
And so this is a big component in trouble with dementia and Alzheimer's is that oftentimes they will pull back, stay home where it's familiar, you know, like, okay, I don't have any trouble making myself a meal in the kitchen, right? Like, I don't have any trouble if the mail comes to me, I can watch TV, right? Versus like getting out and having conversations with different people and stuff. And so it's sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to get people out of their comfort zone. So sometimes their partners may do that for them and encourage them, hey, you know, let's try something new. It may not be comfortable, but can be very beneficial in trying to maintain your brain health, yeah, and slow the progression of that. So that, and I'm always going to emphasize diet, right? Especially if people are suspecting like they're starting dementia, they're seeing memory changes. I'm not usually one that's a proponent of, you know, like one diet for everybody, but time and time again, doing a keto diet or just doing a diet that's high in fats, low in inflammatory carbohydrates, will slow things down significantly. Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. Anything else?
No, I think, I hope that that helps to give up, you know, give folks, ideas, right? Give them a starting point, help them understand how our brain works. And so that if you start to see brain changes or nervous system changes, I think this is definitely one that doesn't get a lot of support in conventional medicine, because a lot of times it's like, oh, okay, your degeneration is happening. Just, you know, buckle up for the ride. Well, that doesn't have to be the case. Yeah. We can definitely slow the progression. Like I said, there's new research that's showing how you can actually reverse Alzheimer's and dementia. So
so cool.
very cool. All right.
Well, thanks, Carmen.